Randy Heffner, one of the biggest reference in API in the world. Did you see that planning, technology, and agility are essential criteria to promote transformation? How does your company and how do you deal with integration process? Come over, Randy, and you have the stage. Thank you.
Oh, so fun to be back at APIX again and in person. I realized I was here the last time it was in person, and I got to speak last year as well. And Patricia started this morning by referring to innovation and how important innovation is. And I think one of the most important ways of being an innovator is to think beyond whatever's there, beyond what other people around you are thinking, beyond what you think is possible or somebody else thinks is possible, and helping others to think beyond as well. So last year, my talk was beyond open to open-ended business. It was focused more on business aspects of innovation and transformation. This time we're going to drill a bit more into the technical side. So this time it's beyond rest. And Kleber mentioned a little bit of this, that business is more complex than just what a single thing, a single technology can do. And so we want to see what the impact of that is. Because over the past decade or so that we've been talking about service-oriented architecture and APIs, the conversation is sort of narrowed down into, well, it's all about rest. And we can fit everything into rest. So let's explore this a little bit. The other thing that I want to make sure that you're thinking about, that we're building on, is the platform notion that Kleber brought up, because a business platform is what you're trying to build. Your company is not a drug company or a manufacturer or a retailer or whatever. You're a platform for doing all kinds of business. And that's what I was talking about last year. So go look up that talk to see more about the business platform side of it. But here we are, 2022, we've been talking about digital transformation for a while, and it's a party, right? We're all having fun with digital transformation. It's not so much fun? This is not a party? I mean, tell me it's a party, please. It's easy, right? Just like going to a party and having fun. Well, no, not so much, but I'm going to say, Marsilio said maybe he was a little bit biased about saying you're going to need APIs. Well, I'm going to say I'm not biased. I'm an independent analyst, and I'm going to tell you, you're going to need this to do digital transformation. You're going to need your API toolbox, because most anything you want to do as a business platform does need APIs, does need interfaces, but we need to think about APIs in the right way. So let's examine this. Let's see what's inside your toolbox. Well, let's see. We've got REST. Yay, REST. We can do a lot with REST. Do we have any other tools? Well, we've got some more REST. Great. So that's all we got? Well, maybe that's okay. What's the problem look like? Well, the problem looks like that. Oh, great. We've got the right tool. What's the next problem look like? Oh, our tool will work for that too. Well, we've got a bunch of those kind of problems. So REST has been working very well for a long time to solve all these different problems that we have, integrating with our digital business platform for digital transformation. And this is good, right? Because all business problems are request-reply problems, right? You don't have anything else, so that should be okay. But wait a minute, what about all these other problems? We got a bunch of other kind of problems because it's not so simple. Because sometimes what your partner or customer or innovator needs is something different than request reply. Maybe they need to be alerted when something happens. They don't know when it's going to happen, so they don't know when to ask about it. Or maybe what they really need is to look at a big set of data and to just navigate through that data in some random way. Or maybe, as opposed to doing a single request, they want to throw a bunch of stuff at you. I got 5,000, 10,000, 1 million items. Or maybe they need something that is in a situation where it has to happen very quickly, very low latency. Or they need to be able to stand back and look at what all has happened over time. What are all the sequence of events over time? Or maybe they're displaying something for end users, for a customer, and they need to have a real-time line open so they can keep updating the display. Well, if you listen to REST proponents over the past 5, 10 years, it's like REST is saying, no, I can do that. Really, I can do that. We can make REST do that. Well, I could probably drive in a nail with a screwdriver, but that's not what a screwdriver is for, and it's not the best tool for it. And so as an API provider, you should be going, help. If REST is all I got, then we need more tools. And we need to think beyond what REST can do and think more creatively about how we build and justify and manage our digital business platform. And the two that we talk about most are the two that Kleber mentioned, which are GraphQL and event mechanisms, and there are multiple event mechanisms. But WebSocket standard or gRPC, even older technologies like file transfers and managed file transfers, these all have a place in your business platform relationships. And so I want to help you drill into a little bit to thinking how. How do you know when to use the right tool and which tool to use? But there's an elephant in the room. Because the reason that REST proponents get all hyped up about everything's got to be REST is because they think REST is the main or the only open thing. Well, open technologies, widely supported technologies are very important, and your external connections do need more openness than internal ones. That is for sure. But it's not the only consideration. There's more to think about when we're trying to understand which connection to use. So let's look at this a little bit more, because the first place to start when you're trying to figure out how to make a connection to your platform with partners in your broader ecosystem is, what's the business scenario? How does the business work? Because the place where we are in thinking about software architecture broadly is digital business, where basically the business and the software are the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin. That's what a business API is. When we have a submit order API, it presents a view up the way the business operates and hides all the technical details of how that is done, so that we can get anybody, any source from anywhere to submit an order, the way the business operates. Lots more to say about API design that I'm not going to get into here, but the point is that the design of the business should be mirrored in the software so that the software can easily change the same way that the business needs to change. So the first place to think about what kind of interface you need, whether it's request reply or event-based or what have you, is to understand what the business situation is like. Because these are two sides of a single design. So what I mean when I say how does the business operate is understanding the dynamics of a business scenario. So a submit order scenario is a great example of, I have a transaction, I need to make it happen, got something, I want to say, do this for me. Great, I got my result, that's request reply. Well, there's lots of business that operates that way. And it might be a data or transaction or something, but that's not the only way that it operates. So maybe I have a data-oriented thing. I need to give you new data, but more often it's I need to read data. But one of the problems that comes up with REST that's driving the need for something like GraphQL is the fact that I have to create a specific API to read specific data. But if my customer scenario is, I just want to see all the data so I can go and find the thing that I need, REST is not a good way to do that. It's a data-oriented sort of connection. We might have another scenario where I just need to know when something happens. I mentioned that. But I'll give here an interesting example that came upon me when I was, back when I was working at Forrester, is a health insurance company who had some APIs out, wanted to be able to start doing events for their community so that a drugstore or a home health provider or whomever could be notified via an event API when something happened with a particular patient that they had a relationship with. We'll talk more about how to make that work because we'll drill into events, but the thing is, that's the business scenario. REST is not the best way to serve that scenario. So it might be some of these other technologies. Or maybe I need constant updates. Just tell me what all is going on. I just want to stay connected to the stream. There are different ways to do that. And by the way, I'm flying at a fairly high level with these dynamics. We'd have to get into how is it that you need constant updates to figure out, well, is Kafka better or WebSocket or something else? How is it? What are the more detailed specifics? I'm just trying to give you a broad brush so that you're aware and understand that you need to look into these things. Okay, or this has to happen now, as in low latency. Here I'll mention one other little specific thing about openness and cost and that sort of thing that is particularly relevant in low latency. So if I want to integrate with a stock exchange, like the New York Stock Exchange or Brazilian Stock Exchange or whatever, there are firms that pay a lot of money to be co-located with the exchange so that the latency between the market and their application is measured in milliseconds or less so that they can make that good financial actions, because in that world of high finance, being 50 milliseconds sooner with your transaction or your trade can make a difference of a fair bit of money, particularly when you add it up over time. So when I have that kind of business dynamic in the scenario, I can pay for a lot of not open. If it's more expensive to develop with not open technologies, then I can pay for a lot of that when I've got that kind of business scenario with a continual flow of money. Okay, maybe I have thousands of things to give you. I could call the REST API. I could make a REST API that can take a whole big batch. But why? Let's just use something that's built for that purpose. Managed file transfer or the like. Maybe I need to see and control a business process. BPMN, other sorts of things, probably supplemented by requests and events. But here's another one that I think is most often not really thought of as an interface, but maybe what will most help your customer or your developers is if you prepackage a bit of the user experience so they can just drop in a visual component. Why make them create all the visual stuff if a standard visual component works? You can do that with web components or JavaScript. But I'll just mention a name here with Netflix. A big part of their strategy has been to be able to show up on many different devices with a similar user experience. And so user experience level actions with Netflix have been very important. Okay, so I could stop here and say, great, I've told you what Beyond Rest is about, that you need these kinds of things. But there's a bit more to it. Let's look at this, because I said that you should start from the business dynamics and what technical tool or construct matches the business dynamics. But the technical world is still important, and you still have to make sure that you handle all the technical concerns. And so in choosing among all these different possibilities, security is the first concern, to make sure that you can meet with whatever the business situation is and whatever technology you're thinking of applying to it, you can meet the security needs of the situation. I would put that as the first requirement. Second is performance and latency. So like that stock market example, latency is the most important driver after security for making that scenario work. And next is ecosystem acceptance. That really is where openness is, because if something is accepted broadly among the ecosystem that you're serving, I would define that as open. That's fundamentally what makes something open. But with the stock market example, say that your ecosystem doesn't currently accept the mechanism that you want to provide. When performance and latency or security demand what you're providing, you can convince them to accept it. Like, okay, you should invest a little more. Here's how it will pay back for your business. Okay, then we can say it needs to be available, easily configured. These are important aspects that open doesn't always provide. And I would put at the top, so broadly, this open concept, the way that it's often used in the industry, that everybody uses it, it's on every platform. So these considerations sort of build up toward openness. But underneath that top level of openness, these other concerns can change the dynamics of how you justify and build a business relationship on your digital business platform. Okay, so let's drill into events a little bit. So that's a broad concept. Again, I could stop here, but I want to provide some more detail on events and data, and then mention a couple of other things at the end. So with events, first of all, just what do we mean when we're talking about events these days? From a standards perspective, it's mostly async API as the mechanism for communicating. That's sort of the emerging standard. But behind async API will be typically Kafka or AMQP as a streaming or a message queuing kind of mechanism. And so this is where the broad base of industry is emerging. There are other ways to construct event mechanisms. Stripe, the credit card processor, just uses a webhook as an event mechanism. And so you tell it what API it should call when something happens, and that's it. So you can do simpler ways, but more broadly speaking, this is the architecture that is emerging. But what do we mean? Well, first of all, let's contrast with request reply, which request reply let me build this out. Google Slides isn't the best with slide builds. You have to do these individually, one by one. So request reply has some nuances to it, that it might be an action I want taken, data I want to get, or a resource like an image or a file that I want to work with. But it's all of the, I got to get something and I'll wait around for it. With events, I'll broadly divide it into two categories. One is the message queuing, when we're focused on a single thing happening, and a single kind of thing. I might have lots of them that are happening, but it's like, just tell me when this and that happens, tell me here, and I'll process it from there. Maybe an event comes in, and it could be any one of 5 different events, but once I've processed it, I'm done. If no other events of that kind happen, I don't have to do anything. And meanwhile, my systems can be going off and doing whatever else they're doing. I don't have to keep asking about status. The other major kind is streaming. And here it is more like just keep a record of the history, send it around to everyone, and I'll look through the history at my leisure. And by the way, with streaming, with something like Kafka, I can go back in history and come forward and analyze that history however I want. But it's more like I just want to tap into a whole stream, and I will decide what I want to use of that stream. I'm simplifying here just to give you a sense, but the most important thing is when you hear somebody talk about events, you have to understand what kind of flow of events, how's the pattern and the business dynamics of that flow of events. And so I'm trying to draw a distinction between two kinds that are more broadly associated with AMQP and Kafka, but it's a vague world. But I provide this foundation to help you think about something else. Because as there are REST proponents, there are event proponents who say everything should be events. Change all of your applications to be event-driven. It's better, and they'll give reasons. But you can easily complexify things. You can make things too complex with events when you're putting events where they don't really belong. It's very hard if you have a fully event-based application, it can be very hard to find where bugs are in it. So you have to be careful with applying it. So the guidance that I give is that use a request when the thing that you need to have happen is integral to what you're doing. I'm collecting up things. I need to submit an order. That is a request. I need to know, that order was accepted. It's part of the process that I am working on. But when I submit that order, then the order engine might fire an event, say, somebody placed an order that becomes part of another process. That is more where events are more useful. When there's a side effect, somebody else may need to know, or when there is a break in the timing of a process. I'm going to do something, I'm going to submit the order now, and we're done with the submit order process. Now I need to know when something happens with that order. That's an event. In some sense, it is the same broad process, but it's a completely different asynchronous stage of that process. So these are the kinds of things to think about when deciding whether to use events. But also the kind of events are very important because when the event conversation applies at multiple levels, and inside when you're coding your application, there may be very good reasons to have events within, in and amongst microservices, even when the processing that's being done is serving a request. You may have microservices level events going on inside. Data flow integration between different applications is another place that you may use events in a more technical way. But the most important events are your business events, things that are a business activity for your business platform, and those can happen broadly, but then we can divide them into events within a domain that where a business domain like order management needs to interact with another business domain like billing. Then we may have business events that are accessible from a domain to other domains. But within a digital business platform context, then we may have business events that are ecosystem flows. So business events like between the health insurance company and retailers or drugstores or what have you. But security for events in an ecosystem context gets very quickly very tricky unless they're just very simple kinds of events. So you have to understand where and how you will meet a number of different demands. I'm going to go through these very quickly because my main point is for you to be aware that there's a lot to think about with events and event security. But first, let me draw the scenario of what I'm talking about. If we've got an order fulfillment as the event source, and I have an internal customer service app that's trying to decide what's the next best action to take with that customer who placed the order, then this is all internal. There aren't that many security requirements comparatively. I could just send all of the events there. But if I also want to publish those events externally, then I have to think much more carefully about, can the entity, the person in my ecosystem who is subscribing to that event, are they authorized to see the data that is inside that event or to see even the event itself? Because maybe if I am making a ticket with an airline, maybe I don't want that airline telling other people about the ticket that I just made. So in other words, here we have a fire hose, and here we have to have a very pinpoint flow. So that leads to a number of different potential security considerations that you have to sift through and make sure whether they do or do not apply to your situation and your business. So it starts with just who owns the data. Who owns the data? Because they're the ones who can decide where that data could go. What's the business relationship and how does that intersect with it? Back to the airline example. If the airline is going to give that data about the ticket to a subcontractor who really is operating as part of the airline's business, then that probably can do that. But if it's a business partner of the airline, they need my approval before it can go external. How many events? How much data do you want to give out via an event mechanism from your digital business platform? How is filtering of events done? Is that done on our side or the side of someone who is subscribing to an event API product? Does filtering include event correlation? Can I get an event if my ticket was done within a certain amount of time of me making a hotel reservation or what have you? Do we charge for event access in our ecosystem the way that we could for REST APIs? Does a customer subscribe or does a third-party event, your application provider subscribe? How do we even understand how authorization works throughout this process? You can leverage OAuth 2 for this kind of scenario, but it's a whole different thing. You have to be very careful with it. How does the source trust that the sync, where it's sending the event, really is the right endpoint and it hasn't been spoofed somehow, or the other way around? And all along throughout this, what forensics should we be capturing so that we can investigate attacks or breaches or suspicious activity? So a lot of things that can happen with events. Okay, drill down on data. Here we are mostly today talking about GraphQL. And so the difference between GraphQL and REST is with data retrieval, with REST, you're defining an individual API for each data access path. And with GraphQL, you're just saying, you're allowing an open-ended access to data. But you have more control with REST about what data that someone can access and how they can access it. When you're designing it, REST, again, you're doing an individual API call for each kind of data access. With GraphQL, you're doing a data graph and letting users, API users, get whatever kind of data they want through that graph. But most importantly, for the moment anyway, if you were to use GraphQL externally, from an API management perspective, the API management providers are paying some attention to GraphQL, not enough at this point, broadly speaking. So you have to drill into what's your provider doing for you. In the end, here's how I would recommend you think about whether to use REST or GraphQL. Use GraphQL when the API users know the data very well and they are allowed to do what they want with the data because you trust them based on what they know about the data. REST is best when data integrity is a high concern, and that is a concern on even if people are just reading data. But so it's important. But if there are any constraints on how they use the data, then REST is a better mechanism. So we see GraphQL most often used among focused teams, like teams producing a website or the like. Okay, GraphQL shifts complexity, it doesn't eliminate it. So you build out a graph, and then, and some will say, oh, this makes everything simple. This makes everything simple. But it doesn't make everything simple. It just shifts around. It makes things simple if you match this scenario exactly, but you still have to define the service, integrate to all the data sources, but then it's simpler if you have highly varied needs, so you don't have to define a whole bunch of different REST APIs, and it's simple if users can access the whole graph, but if they're only supposed to access the orange, then you have to define a separate graph for those who can access only the orange or have some more infrastructure around it. You can hide legacy behind clean data designs, but you still have to tie to the legacy and make that happen effectively. You can do updates to the data through GraphQL, but REST allows greater control and clarity on what's happening with the data because you're defining things more specifically. And if front door security is sufficient, sort of like you get in, you get everything, I don't need to know what you're doing once you're inside, then GraphQL is easier and better, but otherwise you might need REST for more control. Last couple of things is there might be any number of other things that when you look at the situation, you say, well, this other thing would really meet the needs and sufficiently, so run it through all these other decision criteria they've given you, but maybe remote views like JavaScript I mentioned, something like the Twitter embedded timeline API. It's a bit of JavaScript that you put in on your web page. Good old electronic data interchange. It's like a freight train that can move data, a whole lot of data at very low cost, or it can move data very expensively depending upon the EDI implementation that you have. And then custom adapters. So maybe what the best thing for a customer is you've got 12 APIs that all need to be implemented consistently to integrate with SAP or something. Let me just give you an adapter you can drop in the SAP environment, and it knows how to do all that with SAP. Don't make every customer program all that, because here's my APIs, you can use my APIs. Maybe you go across, farther than that, across the line. But always know the business dynamics, know what your ecosystem can accept, and be practical. Don't be religious. So put all the tools in the toolbox, but remember that it is one business relationship with a partner or an app developer or whatever you have. So rather than API portal, let's start thinking of it more as a service connectivity portal to our business platform that has to serve different roles at our customer or business partner and has to serve different roles within our company. And then we're in a much stronger position from a business platform. Last thing, don't go away and say, well, Randy said we should implement a bunch of things besides REST. But what you can do is go away and say, Randy said there are good business reasons to think about other things, and we should be prepared to have a broader platform beyond REST. And that's the way to think about it. Thanks a lot. There you go.
Go over there. Right. Can I? Right. Working. All right, Randy. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thanks. As usual, I ran us out of time. That's why they were trying to give me the hook and pull me off.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But Clever's the boss.
We have some questions here I'd like to shoot you. The first one is it a standard way to measure maturity in terms of integration strategy?
There's not a standard way. I've not seen a good integration maturity model because integration is so varied. So the things that I look at if I'm doing a integration maturity assessment and such is what is the process that people think about for doing integration and selecting the integration tool. And what I want to see is integration driven by business outcomes, not by technical scenarios, and by business design. And then that there is at least some openness and possibility to have different technical mechanisms. And then lastly, we can get to how good the skills and governance and CI/CD chains and everything else are for integration. But it's those top levels that are most often forgotten.
Right, awesome. And beyond the toolbox, how companies can develop knowledge and the culture quicker? Because it's not only the tools, right?
Well, I mean, it starts with typically with technical leaders, architects who think of themselves as business people. If you're an enterprise architect, you're not an architect, you're a business person. If you're an integration architect or an API architect, you're a business person. And then using that to drive different kinds of conversations with business people and understanding that you don't want to drag business people down into the technical. You want to rise up to their level to help them understand that their business their software is their business, and keep the conversations and the business scenarios at that level. Those are the things I see starting to change the culture. So very quick, one example, there's a service provider in the US called My Web Grocer. And the technical folks just started doing APIs because that was the right decision underneath. The business people didn't have any idea what this was about. They couldn't have told you what API was. At some point, they saw the business results of doing that, and the business people started saying, here's this new thing I want you to do, and can I have an API with that? Because they understood the connection, and that began to change the culture a lot more.
All right.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you very much,
Thanks,
Randy.